Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a totally unbelievable and truly harrowing period in human history. We are going to trace the unvarnished reality of the Second World War, specifically from 1939 to 1944. And we're going to look at the whole picture, everything from the breathtaking hubris of its top commanders, right down to the raw, visceral human experience on the ground.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the Blitzkrieg, Britain's winter stand, the Eastern Front, the eruption in the Pacific, the pivotal turning points, and lastly, the unimaginable human cost of it all. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Blitzkrieg Unleashed, a new kind of war.
Back in September 1939, the world was introduced to a terrifying new concept in warfare. This wasn't the slow, static trench warfare of the past, you know? This was an amphetamine-fueled, mechanized lightning strike by the German war machine. And as it crossed into Poland, it was just a stark David versus Goliath mismatch. Germany rolled in with 3,600 armored vehicles and nearly 2,000 modern planes. Poland put up a really brave resistance, but they only had 750 armored vehicles and around 900 pretty much obsolete planes. It was literally a mechanized monster, just easily overpowering that early resistance.
And it's hard to overstate just how fast this happened. The rapid pacing of this conquest completely shattered Allied expectations. Poland fell in September, Denmark and Norway in April, and then, by May 1940, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The speed was so intense that it pushed the British Expeditionary Force into a massive, desperate scramble of a retreat at the port of Dunkirk.
Now, it's really easy to just look at those macro statistics, but what did this actually feel like on the ground? Well, this diary entry from a French soldier really grounds us in the intimate, sheer terror that these guys faced. He wrote, "Suddenly there's a rain of bombs, and it goes on and on. Some were firing their rifles like lunatics. There was mass hysteria." It just paints a devastating picture of what this new warfare was really like to live through.
Section 2. Britain and the Winter. The Hubris Trap.
So this is where that Axis hubris finally collides with fierce resistance and some seriously game-changing technological innovation. Between August 8th and 24th of 1940, the heavily favored German Luftwaffe lost 397 aircraft. The RAF, they lost 204. So how did Britain pull off this massive upset during the Battle of Britain? Well, they were ahead in the science. British radar technology and their total workhorse, the Hawker Hurricane fighter plane, created a defense that the Germans just completely didn't expect.
And honestly, this next quote perfectly captures the trap of that overwhelming overconfidence. This is from Hans Otterlesing, a very confident German fighter pilot writing home. He says, "I'm having the time of my life. Peacetime will be very boring after this." He was supremely confident, but reality struck back hard. He was actually shot down and killed by the British later that exact same day.
Also, we really need to bust a huge Eurocentric myth right now. Yes, Britain was an island, but they were absolutely not fighting this thing alone. A massive, truly global force was mobilizing for the Allies. We're talking 2.25 million Indian soldiers, a third of a million African troops, 7,000 Caribbean enlistees in the RAF, incredibly brave exiled Polish pilots, plus forces from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. This was the whole globe mobilizing.
Section 3. The Eastern Meat Grinder. Operation Barbarossa.
Over here, the scale of carnage and, frankly, the arrogance of the leadership reached entirely new and horrifying levels. 3.6 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering amount of German troops that poured into the Soviet Union in June 1941. And get this, the German high command was so incredibly arrogant, they actually expected a total victory in just 14 days. 14 days.
But again, we have to immediately bring that massive invasion statistic back down to the devastating human reality. This is a letter written by a 12-year-old child in Smolensk to their father on the front lines. "Papa, the German monsters set fire to us, you can't even call them humans." It gives us this deeply personal, unfiltered look at the immense trauma of civilians caught right in the crossfire of this colossal invasion.
Ultimately, the unstoppable Blitzkrieg finally met its match. German hubris assumed a quick summer victory. They literally didn't even pack winter clothes for their troops, and their vehicle fuel ended up freezing solid in the engines. The Soviet reality, though, was very different. The Germans ran headfirst into a brutal Russian winter, a relentless Soviet scorched earth policy, and incredibly tough Red Army troops who were equipped with these formidable T-34 tanks. The entire war machine just completely stalled out.
Section 4. The Pacific erupts. Global war expansion. So while Europe was quite literally freezing, the conflict exploded on the other side of the planet. Right after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Japanese Empire expanded rapidly. They invaded Siam, Burma, and Malaya in this dizzying succession. By February 1942, Singapore had surrendered. It was a terrifyingly fast expansion that just caught the Allies completely off guard.
And the warfare that followed? It was absolute hell. This quote brings together the accounts of an American corporal and an Australian chaplain, describing places like Guadalcanal and Papua New Guinea. The reality of jungle combat was just delirious. Men were fighting through extreme heat, heavy rain, and starvation. In some of these campaigns, tropical diseases like malaria and typhus were killing and incapacitating just as many men, if not more than the enemy bullets actually did.
Section 5. The tide finally turns, breaking Axis momentum.
Then, in 1942, that seemingly unstoppable momentum finally breaks. At the Battle of Midway in the Pacific, the United States leveraged vastly superior code breaking to set up a massive tactical ambush. The U.S. lost one aircraft carrier, but they dealt an absolutely crippling blow to the Japanese Navy, sinking 4 of their major carriers. Talk about a turning point. It was a complete game changer.
Meanwhile, back in Europe, the tide was turning too, but in the most agonizing way imaginable. Over 1 million. That is the estimated death toll of the Battle of Stalingrad alone. It still stands as the bloodiest battle in human history. After 5 months of just unimaginable, non-stop street carnage and freezing temperatures, the Soviet military finally crushed the German advance. It marked the definitive, agonizing turn of the war in Europe.
Section 6. The unimaginable human cost. The price of total war.
Stepping back from the military tactics and the territorial gains, we have to impartially look at the horrific civilian suffering this war unleashed. 6 million Jewish people systematically murdered in Nazi extermination camps. 15 million Chinese civilians dead as a result of Japanese occupation. 3 million dead in the Bengal famine. 1 million starved to death in the siege of Leningrad. The scale of civilian loss across the globe is simply staggering. And behind every single one of those numbers is a visceral, desperate human struggle. Elena Skarabina, during the siege of Leningrad, wrote this in her diary. Everyone is preoccupied with only one thought: where to get something edible. We have returned to prehistoric times. It is a harrowing reminder of exactly what happens when the machinery of total war grinds over a civilian population that is just trying to survive.
And the trauma wasn't limited to civilians either. The psychological destruction on the front lines was immense. There were an estimated 1.5 million Soviet desertions alone. Thousands of soldiers across all sides were executed by their own commanders simply for mentally breaking down. It was a massive, largely hidden epidemic of combat trauma, severely punished in an era that completely lacked compassion for the shattered minds of its youth.
Which leaves us with this final thought. As the year 1944 arrived, and as exhausted, war-torn Allied troops prepared to cross the English Channel for D-Day, amidst millions of global casualties, how much more could a completely shattered world actually endure? It really forces us to contemplate the true, infinite cost of this global catastrophe. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.